Thanks again, by the way, for giving me this opportunity to intern for you. I feel like I've already learned so much.
It's my pleasure. I'm always looking for new interns. Do you feel inspired?
I think like here in a client's house is just a little bit inappropriate.
This client wants the sexual energy in this room.
Wow. So nice. Thanks again, by the way, for giving me this opportunity to intern for you. I feel like I've already learned so much.
It's my pleasure. I'm always looking for new interns, but today we're going to sort of test you.
Great. I'm totally ready.
So, what do you think of this space?
The perfect interior unfolds as a carefully constructed meditation on mentorship, aspiration, and the complicated emotional terrain that emerges when admiration, desire, and authority intersect, presenting a narrative that is far less about impropriety or shock than it is about how women learn to read their own feelings within professional, social, and emotional hierarchies that are rarely designed with queer interiority in mind. From the opening moment, the dynamic between Abigail and Whitney is framed through movement and attention. Abigail leads with confidence and fluency in her craft, while Whitney follows, literally and figuratively, notebook in hand, eager, observant, and deeply invested in the opportunity before her. Whitney's gratitude and excitement situate her as someone who has worked hard to arrive at this threshold, and her admiration for Abigail is immediately layered, blending professional respect with a more difficult-to-name fascination that many queer women will recognize as the early stages of attraction that hides comfortably inside hero worship. Abigail's framing of the internship as a test establishes both stakes and imbalance, reflecting real-world structures in which young women are often asked to prove themselves under the watchful eye of those who already possess legitimacy, authority, and confidence. A dynamic that can intensify emotional dependency even when intentions are generous. The bedroom itself functions as a symbolic container for the film's central questions, a private space temporarily rendered professional, inviting reflection on how intimacy and labor so often overlap for women, particularly in careers that require emotional sensitivity, aesthetic judgment, and attunement to other people's needs. Whitney's initial assessment that the room already looks nice is not naive so much as earnest, revealing her desire to please and her uncertainty about asserting her own perspective. While Abigail's gentle correction reframes design as a practice of empathy, identity, and adaptability, emphasizing that what matters is not surface beauty but resonance with the person who inhabits the space. This philosophy quietly mirrors the film's broader concerns, suggesting that relationships between women, too, must be understood contextually rather than judged by external appearances or rigid rules. Abigail's discussion of lighting and atmosphere, articulated in terms of mood and flexibility, reinforces the idea that environments, like relationships, are dynamic and responsive, shaped by moments that cannot always be anticipated or neatly categorized. Throughout this exchange, Whitney's attention remains fixed on Abigail, illustrating how admiration can become a lens through which everything else is filtered, and how mentorship can unintentionally invite longing when guidance is delivered with warmth, confidence, and intimacy. The invitation for Whitney to lie on the bed marks a pivotal moment not because of physicality, but because it crosses an invisible threshold between observation and participation, asking Whitney to move from analysis to experience, from distance to vulnerability. Her hesitation is significant, reflecting an awareness of boundaries and the internalized expectation that professionalism requires emotional containment, especially for women who are already taught to monitor themselves closely to avoid misinterpretation. Abigail's reassurance, grounded in her familiarity with the client and her framing of the exercise as legitimate work, complicates the moment ethically, highlighting how power can be exercised gently and persuasively rather than overtly, a nuance that queer women in professional settings often navigate with care and ambivalence. The scene's emotional core lies not in action but in Whitney's internal negotiation, the quiet recalibration that occurs as she weighs her desire to learn, to belong, and to be seen against her fear of crossing a line that could cost her safety or credibility. Abigail's confidence and ease contrast with Whitney's uncertainty, illustrating how experience can create asymmetry not only in authority but in emotional risk, a dynamic that resonates deeply within queer communities where age, status, or professional standing can shape the terms under which intimacy is explored. Importantly, the film resists framing Whitney as passive or naive. Her consent is depicted as thoughtful and evolving, shaped by trust and curiosity rather than coercion, even as the imbalance between them remains an undercurrent that invites critical reflection rather than romanticization. For lesbian and queer women, this dynamic echoes familiar patterns in which admiration, mentorship, and attraction intertwine, often providing a socially acceptable framework through which desire can be expressed without immediately naming itself as such. The professional setting offers cover, allowing emotional intensity to be rationalized as dedication or enthusiasm, a strategy that can feel safer in a culture that remains uneasy with women's love for one another unless it is clearly labeled or safely contained. At the same time, the film acknowledges the emotional cost of this indirection, suggesting that when desire must always be translated into acceptable terms, women may struggle to discern where genuine connection ends and obligation or aspiration begins. Beyond its queer specificity, The Perfect Interior speaks to broader experiences of women navigating workplaces that demand emotional labor, while discouraging emotional truth, asking them to be attentive, warm, and intuitive without ever appearing too invested or vulnerable. Whitney's eagerness and self-monitoring reflect the pressure many women feel to be both competent and agreeable, to absorb guidance without challenging authority, and to manage their own feelings quietly so as not to disrupt the professional environment. Abigail's role, meanwhile, embodies the complexities of women who have achieved a measure of power within their fields and must reconcile their own desires with the responsibility that power entails, particularly when mentoring others who look to them not only for instruction but for validation and possibility. The film's restrained tone and focus on emotional exchange rather than spectacle serve as a critique of cultural tendencies to sensationalize or trivialize intimacy between women, especially when it arises in contexts that defy simple categorization. Rather than presenting the relationship as taboo or transgressive, the narrative treats it as ethically complex and emotionally real, insisting that women's connections deserve to be examined with seriousness and care rather than reduced to fantasy or scandal. By centering interior lives, the film challenges viewers to consider how societal discomfort with women's intimacy often leads to overregulation or erasure, forcing queer women in particular to constantly assess how visible they can afford to be without jeopardizing their safety or aspirations. The bedroom, as both a design space and a site of emotional revelation, becomes a metaphor for the process of self-recognition, a reminder that understanding oneself requires entering spaces that feel vulnerable and uncertain, guided by trust but shadowed by risk. In this way, The Perfect Interior positions itself as a thoughtful contribution to conversations about visibility, power, and authenticity, offering a narrative that honors the quiet resilience of women-centered relationships and the careful negotiations they entail. It affirms that women's love for women, whether expressed through mentorship, admiration, or unspoken longing, is not a disruption to be managed, but a reality to be understood, approached with honesty, accountability, and respect, and recognized as part of the ongoing work of becoming visible to oneself and to others in a world that still struggles to fully acknowledge the depth, seriousness, and legitimacy of women's emotional lives.